Hey there, Mark Brown. Not enough content? What? Often we don't hear that, but it is a challenge for emerging presenters. But in this episode, we've got something maybe creative for those of you who are out there who have a rock solid keynote, that you're seasoned, you know your stuff. However, we have an idea for you too.
Because you may have more content than you know. Darren, let's talk about it.
And then what to do with the extra content. Check it out.
Anyone can give a presentation. Few deliver unforgettable presentations. What's the difference? You're about to find out. Welcome to the Unforgettable Presentations Podcasts with your hosts, world champion speakers and coaches Mark Brown.
Your life tells a story, and there's someone out there who needs to hear it.
And Darren LaCroix.
Stage time, stage time, stage time.
Ready for some powerful presentation ahas? Let's dive right in.
All right, Mark, not enough content.
Yeah.
More maybe relatable to a newer emerging, but what I'm going to encourage people who are experienced and already have a rockin' keynote is, what if there's a better piece of content? What if there's better content that, I know our friend Craig Valentine talks about this. It's the bounce method, where when you add one new piece of content, it refreshes the whole load. It makes your whole keynote exciting when you're testing out a new piece of content. So maybe new content, not enough content, adding some content. Mark Brown?
Well, look, all of the above. And I know that, as you said earlier, this may really appeal to our emerging speakers who are really eager. They're really excited. They want to go out there. And I met with an individual this week, a prospective client who was in just that place. And so many people are eager. They have passion for a topic. They're good at it and they want to share. They want to get out there. I want to get stage time. And there's two considerations. One, they have an idea, but they don't have enough content. And number two, they have an idea and they think they don't have enough content. And that's one aspect of this topic I would like us to also take a look at today, Darren. When we think we don't have enough, but we may actually have more than we do. Now, friends who are watching and listening, we did not come with prepared notes for this conversation. We're very spontaneous. We're very honest. And we put each other on the spot sometimes. For example, Darren has told me in the past on many an occasion that when he began, he didn't have enough content. So Darren, take us back to the mid-1990s when you felt you lacked content. How did you navigate that? And what do you know now that you wish you knew 30 years ago?
Well, Mark, I didn't feel I had not enough content. I literally didn't have enough content. I mean, I was just getting started. I was clear that I wanted to talk about humor in business. I wanted to be motivational and humorous. So humor was my topic. Stand-up was my background. But just because you love a topic doesn't mean you earn the right for an audience. And then even if you earn the right, it doesn't mean you serve them. So the early days, what I did was I overcompensated with client research. That I had a few stories, I had some ideas, but I really wanted to connect with them. So I found one of the best ways to do that was to, number one, I hired a comedian friend back then, which now I recommend Chris McGuire because he's the king at this. Chris McGuire, you can check him out on LinkedIn. And I've hired him on 2 occasions. But back then I hired a woman named Katie Grady, and she was a comedian in New England, and I needed this brainstorming, if you will. But what we did together is we would research the client. I would do interviews. So I always asked for 10 people to talk to. And what I was looking for was their stories about their challenges that related to my subject. Because when you can hold up an audience member, now I still do this to a lesser degree, but now I'm doing it for connection as opposed to content. So I'm reinforcing some of my points with their ideas or their examples or their quotes or their stories. But back then, I was, let's just say in a 60-minute keynote, I would say 30% was my content or 30 minutes was my content and 30 minutes was all about them. So I did more research on the client to get their specific examples. Now, switch that over a little bit when I started writing the book, Laugh and Get Rich, because that was in line with my topic. I interviewed business people who used humor as part of their business plan.
Oh, good.
So now, what it does, think about this. Think this one through. It upped my credibility because I was using, Mark, I was 23 years old. What do I know about business? From experience, I had a Subway sandwich shop that failed. Okay. I moved on after failure, but I couldn't say I was some successful business person at that time.
Right.
So I tapped into stories of people who were successful in business and used humor. So I sat down with Sherwin Greenblatt. He was the COO, Dr. Bose Spears, Dr. Bose's first employee, because he was known when I worked there, he was known that I had this quote of his right up on my desk that I'll paraphrase because I don't remember word for word, but hey, if we're going to have to work hard all day, why not make it fun and play? If we're going to have to work for, 8 hours in a day, why not make it fun? And so whenever my boss would give me a hard time about having fun, I'd be like, but look what he said. I used to, embarrassing, but I used to work at one of those cubes, and there's a guy who worked, there are 4 cubes next to each other. There's a guy who worked on the cube right across from me, and one day I just balled up a piece of paper and I hit it over, and then he hit it back, and then we would play cube volleyball while we were working. But not the most productive thing, but it was fun, a little break here and there. But anyway, I interviewed Barry and Elliott, who in New England, they were known for furniture. They were the furniture guys, but they had lots of commercials and a lot of fun. So I interviewed people who were there. Now I'm using their stories, their examples,
right.
That upped my credibility. So that was really big back then. Interviewing people in the field of my, let's just say my subject, my area of expertise, that thing that I wanted to talk about. So it was super helpful. And by the way, how does a 23-year-old get to interview the COO of a company, get to interview Barry and Elliott, who were pretty famous in New England? I asked.
No kidding.
Well, the people that I interviewed, most of them were millionaires and successful in business. What did I have to offer? I could mention them in a book.
Exactly.
So that's one thing that maybe they never had before, was being a chapter in a book. And then, Mark, when I started teaching speakers how to be funnier, I thought, well, who am I? I'm still like an emerging comedian, a humorist, but I haven't really, quote unquote, made it. So I interviewed the people I connected to. So Izzy Gassell, Rosemary Very, Judy Bush. These are people who were humorists back in New England in the day. And then comedians like Don Gavin, comedy legends in New England who knew me and were willing to sit down for an hour with me. Dick Doherty. So I interviewed them. I asked them the questions that anyone would want to know. And what was cool was on the back of the packaging, I didn't have any credibility, but Bob Seibel did cruise ships. Dick Doherty owned his own comedy club and was a headliner. So I used their credibility to up my credibility, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. You're saying if we can use our network in our field of expertise and build relationships, we can not only get content, but also build our credibility. And friends, please do not discount or think negatively what Darren said, that only maybe half his content was his own and the other half came from the client. There is value in that. So there's a double-edged sword here. You can say, okay, I'll get by with half mine, half theirs. Don't think in terms of getting by in that way. Think in terms of learning from them, but also understand when you reference the client stories, client employees, client team members, you're telling the client, I don't just come with a cookie cutter material that I think is going to work for everybody. It shows you put the work in. It also builds the habit of learning more about your client, because the more we get into the habit of learning about our clients, the more effectively we can serve them where they are. And Darren, I don't know this to be true, but I assume it's to be true. You began doing this back in the 1990s, okay, over 30 years ago. But the habit you built, the methodology you began to adopt has helped you. And you say you still interview client employees to this very day, because the practice was also helpful. You focus, your balance is different, your budget of time is different, but you've learned the value of finding out what the client's needs are, where their joys are, who the heroes in their company are. And it gives you the credibility of not only being an expert in your field after 30 years, but one who truly cares about the client. So friends, you may think, I don't have enough content, but part of your content can, and I dare say should, reflect on what your audience is, what's important to your audience. What are they going through? What are their challenges? And if you can solve their challenges by addressing specifically what they're going through, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, it was an exorbitant amount of time.
On the front end, right?
But when you're new and emerging, I didn't have a lot of booking, so I had the time. I did have a day job too. So what it allowed me to do is kind of figure out how to get to the heart of the matter much more quickly. So now I ask about frustrations, pet peeves in their day-to-day life. I still remember I spoke at Berkshire Life Insurance. And one of their pet peeves when I interviewed people was the parking lot. So they were repaving the parking lot. And so they had to walk like 2 miles from where they could park for a while. And so, of course, I had fun with that. And that helped me build a connection. But now I've understand, I can ask for 5 or 10 minutes. Now, if a conversation's going good, I continue the conversation. If I can tell that they're, very short answers with me, then I respect their time. And I say, thank you and goodbye, and make sure you say hello when we get to the event. So now it's, again, more about connection or reinforcing some of my content. Back then, it was a lot of their stories, a lot of their examples and content. But Mark, fast forward to 2001, for those of you who are experienced, listen up. Those of you who are emerging, put it right up to your ear. Let's get this. When I was writing my championship speech with you, Mark, I knew the story of Dr. Goddard. I lived in the town where Dr. Goddard launched the rocket. In my high school, right across the street, there was a McDonald's. They had Dr. Goddard wallpaper with images of him and his rocket in the McDonald's.
Wow.
Like, he was a big deal in our town. There was a monument at the golf course where he launched it. There was a monument next to the fire station. It's still there, of an actual replica of his rocket. You don't know everything about your topic. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to beg. I'm going to implore you to go deeper and always continue to research. Because even though I knew all of this about Dr. Goddard, I didn't know everything. So because I understood the gravity, the importance of this speech, I went to the Dr. Goddard Museum.
Ooh, wow.
It was at Clark University, where he was a professor. And they had this whole museum set up in the basement. I went in, I I learned that he invented the bazooka, which is a shoulder-launched rocket. I learned that the book This High Man, they actually took one to the moon in his honor, one of those books. And then I also learned about the New York Times headline, 238,799 and a half miles, the moon rocket missed its target. And so as Chris McGuire would say, my humor detector went off by strangers telling you can't do this. This isn't for you. And so I saw, because of my study in comedy, my relentlessly going up on stage, but I tuned into humor. What makes people laugh? What triggers laughter? And so when I saw that headline, I knew it did, but now I couldn't just use it for a laugh. I used it to make a point as well as getting the laugh. But it's because I took the time to research more. I never used anything about the bazooka. I never used anything about the book. They had, I think, the flag that was on the moon there. I didn't use any of that. But I did find a piece of gold. So we're never done. We're never done. We should always be upping our content. There we go. Upping our content. Up your content. Mark?
What I find interesting there is the piece that's for the experienced speakers. In case you haven't noticed, the world is changing constantly. Technology is changing constantly. Industries are changing constantly. Need I say more? So as well-versed as we may be in our topic and as experienced as we are, ask yourself, what more can I learn? What is new in my area of expertise? Who is trending in my area of expertise? We have so many tools available to us now. I'm not going to AI in depth. We can use AI tools, but who are the emerging leaders in the field? And maybe like Darren LaCroix, could I possibly call or interview or ask them a question? Because if you don't ask, the answer is always no. This may sound a little bit off track, but I need to go back almost 2 years. As we were working on our podcast, one of my dream guests was a man we interviewed almost 2 years ago. His name is Peter Drury. Peter Drury is an English football commentator, highly experienced, and ranked as one of the best football commentators in the world. I had this dream, Darren, of getting him on our podcast. I want someone from his field to share his ideas, in a sense, to bring new content to our podcast. It's World Cup in Qatar in the Middle East. I'm thinking, I see his LinkedIn profile. Nah, he's world known. He's the best. I mean, this guy is famous. The whole world knows him. He doesn't know who I am. On a lark, I sent a note because he has no social media but LinkedIn. I sent him a LinkedIn message and say, well, at least I sent it. Wonder of wonders. A couple of days later, I get a response back. Then I get an email and he says, yes. And Peter Drury appeared on our podcast, I think January of 2022, but 23. And I'm like, all I had to do was ask. To do what seemed, it didn't make any sense. This guy doesn't know who I am. He's world famous. I mean, Darren, we had him on the podcast. You saw his one commentary there. People play a thing over and over again for the last several years. He's famous. But I asked the question. He said yes. He came on, and we've since maintained a good relationship. Because I asked the question and I asked, who is the person I want? Who is the best at what he does? And Peter Drury stood up, boom, I'll reach out to him. You may know someone who is now trending in your industry, in your area of expertise, who may be open to a conversation, maybe being mentioned in your speech, being mentioned in your book or on your podcast, but you haven't asked them. And they may hold within them a wealth of content that could help you to prepare more effectively for your audience. So the question is, who is trending? Who do I need to know? What's new in the industry? Despite all I know already, what more can I learn? And what more can I share? And if nothing else comes through, it's this, Darren. You were the example. My goodness, you are such an example of this, Darren. You put the hard yards in. You put the work in on the back end. So when it comes up to the front, wow, you're so lucky. This is amazing. Lucky? You put the work in. That's important. So we can find new content by simply examining what else exists in our industry, what's trending, who's trending, what's being said, what's new, what's different, and stay on top of your game.
Yeah, Mark, I think this is more relevant to those experienced speakers than maybe they think. We have to be constantly upgrading. And we talked about a couple of weeks ago that Ed Tate's philosophy of, okay, this piece of content, what serves this audience best? And the winner, I think he called it the winning draw or something like that, that he would pit content against content in training. Module against module, what is most important? What will serve this audience the best for this topic? So I took this to another level, Mark. And it was just a little tiny voice in my head that said, maybe you should check this out. So I was speaking to LVCVA, which is the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority.
Right.
I'm presenting to them, and my goal is to talk to their salespeople to help them be aware of my all-in keynote, where I use Vegas stories combined with my story and as a keynote. So it's a Vegas-themed keynote for conventions in Vegas. So I wanted to create that awareness. And at the end of the meeting, somebody pulled me aside and said, well, sometimes we get requests for someone to present about the history of Vegas. And we have a historian, but she's not really a speaker. And something like clicked. And I just held that thought. And then when I got back home, I was like, you know what? I need to meet this lady. She's a historian on Vegas. I bet there are some great Vegas stories from back in the day about All In. So I reached out to her, just hoping to meet her for coffee or talk to her or see what she might. She invited me for a personal one-on-one tour of the archives. And so there's an archives building here that's not open to the public, but I was able to go in and she showed me these, oh my gosh, it was just amazing. All of this memorabilia. There was like a program from when Muhammad Ali fought back in the day here, but it just changed his name. So he was Muhammad Ali, but on the flyer, it still said Cassius Clay.
Wow.
Now, that's not an all-in story, but it's cool that I'm just learning all this. So I go around and she's like, I have to show you this video. And Sammy Davis Jr. had been part of, I guess, a trio with his uncles, and he had performed with them from when he was a kid. That's kind of how he got started, I think. Now, she said, what do you notice about this video? And she played the video, and he's performing, and I was just like, wow, wait, something. It's his eyes. And she said, yes, this was prior to his car accident when he lost his eye. And so, but I was so intrigued, and she said that he was done with entertainment. That was it. He can't perform with one eye. And now I still need to research this and validate exactly how this was said. So this is my second hand prior to doing more research, because you and I need to do more research to verify things before we go talking about it. But I'm just using this as an example of it's not verified yet. But apparently Frank Sinatra went into his hospital room, was talking about to him, and he said he's done with entertainment. And he said, wait a minute. He goes, look at your successes. You're black and you're Jewish and you made it in entertainment. You can be an entertainer with one eye.
Wow, perspective.
Yes. And so I just love that. I was like, I didn't know Sinatra was a motivational speaker. But because so many of us know him after the accident, his performance, that might not have happened without that perspective from Frank Sinatra. So that's going to be a story that I need to make better and stronger and verify it, obviously. But that's a great story of All In. We need to bring perspectives that people don't know. Look, All In, it's a universal message. I get it. It's not new, but as Mark says, I bring me to it.
Yep.
And that's, and I also am marketing it so they know it's a thing. Anyway, my point is that you're never done doing research.
That's
You're
key.
never done. There was another story of a gentleman who literally was one of the first photographers here in Vegas, and they were news photographers. Their whole goal was to market Vegas. And I don't even remember what year, but back in like the 50s, they were taking pictures of Vegas, and they were trying to market Vegas as the entertainment capital of the world. Well, it wasn't back then. They were just getting started. But this is there was a famous picture when the atomic bomb went off, and there was a hill, or excuse me, a mountain where all the reporters could go to take pictures at a safe distance. Well, apparently this gentleman, who was the leader of this news team, slept in that day and didn't wake up in time. So he had to figure out something to do to take a picture of the atomic blast. And one of his friends owned a drugstore. So he went onto the roof of the drugstore and and you can see the atomic blast in the background, but you see signs of Vegas on either side. These billboards and the blast in the background. Well, apparently when he's taking the picture, his foot fell through the roof.
Oh, no.
And that caused him to snap the picture. And this famous picture was done when he was literally all in, or one
Literally
foot.
in, all through the roof. He went through the roof, Darren.
Boom.
Boom. Ching. I know, bad pun. I know, but I haven't done any bad puns in a long time. But you've talked about, Darren, the effort that we really need to go through. As much knowledge as we have, as much experience as we have, there's always something new to learn, particularly as things, as industry, as the world is changing. And I can't devalue enough the power of research. I think research has become somewhat of a theme of today's podcast regarding not enough content. And I said earlier, you may have more content than you know. And to touch on that briefly, I will say this, Darren, for everyone listening here, very often we think we got to have great stories, fantastic experiences. But you have to, and I say this, I restated this particular thought, Darren. I used to say your story need not be sensational, it need be sincere, but I've since changed that. Your story need not be remarkable, it just needs to be relatable, which goes back to what you said earlier about the connection to the audience. You may have material from your own life, an experience you may have discounted that may be relevant to an audience you have or a potential new audience. So here's my ask, friends. Over time, review the items and the content in your story folder. Over time, once in a while, just go back and see what's there. You may literally unearth a memory and you say, oh, wow, I had forgotten about that one. I haven't told that story in about 6 or 7 years, but right now it's really relevant. And we have this mode, Darren, we want the next big new thing. We want the next new iPhone or Google Pixel 2. We want the next new tech. We want the next new AI tool. We want the next. But I submit to you, my friends, we may have more content than we know in the foundation of the building. We may have fantastic material in the basement. Picture, if you will, somebody going down to mom and dad's basement and they turn the light on and they go, they pull a chain, but old chain light there, and click, and you go, it's dusty down here. And you walk down and you see the tricycle you used to ride when you were 6 years old or 5 years old. And something about that sparks a memory that becomes applicable to a topic you're discussing now, to a client you're dealing with right now. And you go, oh my goodness, I'd forgotten about that. In the basements of our memories, in the back of our story folders, is material and content that could be dynamite, explosive for your audience if we invest the time as part of our process as professionals to review and rehearse what we've used in the past. Because sometimes you dust that thing off and it becomes pure gold. You may have more content in the archives, in the basement, in the back burner, in the back of the bus, or somewhere buried deep in that story folder. And when you pull that bad boy out, everything changes.
Yeah. Research. Here's the cool part. If it doesn't make it in your keynote, it could be a social media post. related to your topic. So more research, I think, whether you're an emerging presenter or a seasoned pro, we should always continue to research our topic for that better example. And maybe if even it's not better than what you have, maybe it's rock solid. That could be a social media post, an article, a LinkedIn post. Look, we've got to continue to be that expert. So we've got to continue to search, gather more content. And Mark, in the old days of stand-up, there's opening act, middle act, and headliner. So, of course, all the middle acts are trying to become headliners.
Sure.
Well, you become a headliner. That you are the middle act that is so good, the headliner can't follow you.
Ooh.
So eventually you earn that spot. Same thing with your content. We've got to continue to get new content. And what's exciting, Mark, is if we know our keynote cold, but we have that one new story, I don't know about you, but it kind of gets me excited that, like, I'm excited about the, Sammy Davis Jr. Piece that I'm going to add in once I continue to verify, what Frank said. But now it refreshes the whole keynote. And what's cool is it's not all brand new. I know the rest of it good, well, cold, could deliver it in my sleep. But now I put this one new one in and it becomes exciting to see what are people talking about after. And one of the great things about Talkadot is what do they comment on? For those of you who don't know, Talkadot.com, a game changer in our industry, a way to get feedback, get client leads, but also, figure out what's working. And people talking about. So if I do this, and right now I have a story about the Vegas sign, a story about Hoover Dam, a story about the Raiders. So the last time I gave it, people talked about the Raiders story. Well, if all of a sudden I start hearing about the Sammy Davis Jr. or Frank Sinatra story, well, I know that's more memorable because that's what they're talking about after. And then when people come up to you after, ask them. They say, oh, it was great. Well, it's nice to get the pat on the head, the pat on the back. That's nice, but that does not serve your next audience. It does not serve your career. It serves your ego. So we got to ask questions that serve our career. What was most helpful to you? What stories do you remember? So if we ask that question, they're happy to comply and give us that feedback. Well, that's gold. If we start hearing about the Frank Sinatra story a lot, we know that stays. That just earned headline status. Okay, which ones aren't they talking about? Maybe it's the Hoover Dam story. But we've got to, doesn't mean I still can't use it in social media. It doesn't mean I can't use it elsewhere. But in the keynote, you only got 45 minutes. If you got too much content, go to episode 274.
One more thought for you, Darren. Well, one more thought, which comes in the form of a question. Now, friends, I know Darren and LaCroix pretty well. It's been 23 years, been best friends, been brothers. And every year we do a program called Game Changers, our annual conference. We all get together with Vegas. All the coaches are there. We bring guest experts in. And Darren, you've made a commitment for the last several years that every year at Game Changers, you're going to come up with new content. Really briefly, just let our listeners understand why you feel so passionate about that and how it has helped you as a professional in your career to have that mindset.
Well, we have the same audience that comes primarily every year. We have a lot of repeat attendees, which is awesome. But now I bring in new experts, of course, but they're seeing you, me, Ed, and I feel obligated. And for me, it's a creativity thing. I need to be creative. So I need to create new content. So it drives me. But what's cool is I have a new audience that I deliver this to. And then based on the response and how it goes, I may use it in the future. I may not. But I'm all in trying out and testing this new content. A few years ago, I did the 17 Minutes to Your Dream. Well, that ended up becoming a book.
Boom.
All in, I did last year. That became a keynote. So what am I going to do this year? I'm thinking before 8 a.m.
How do you start your day?
What do you do before 8 a.m.? Because then once 8 a.m. starts, the rest of your day. So what do you do? What are those habits that you do first? The best advice I ever got about writing a book was so simple. Write before breakfast.
By the pool?
right before breakfast. But no, I didn't do it. But what it was telling me was then the rest of your day doesn't get in the way. And that's why I just heard this concept from a presenter, Terry Seville Foy.
Yeah, I think it's familiar.
And
Seville
been
Foy.
listening to a lot of her lately, and she has a book about it. And I was like, ooh, I like that idea. I love that concept. So I got to create my version of it. But anyway, so Mark, whether you're new or whether you're seasoned, we've got to constantly create and find and research new content.
Yeah. And I love that last thought. Really, one bad pun, listeners. I know I wasn't been good so far, but one bad pun. So, Darren, should I write right before breakfast? Friends, we all have good content. Emerging, you may have a little, you may have more than you know. So I invite you to do more research. I invite you to go back to your archives. I invite you to invest the time and be bold enough to find out who's in the industry who you can talk to. And listen, one of the ways to get new content is to be a part of Stage Time University. Why? We help each other unearth and we do story digs to find out what's inside of us that we can provide to our clients, to our audiences, to those who depend on us to help inspire them, to instruct them, and to guide them into what we know. It's a worldwide community. We'd love to have you be a part of what we do. And Darren, I want to thank you for the opportunity I get to share with you, your constituents, your clients, and to bring this podcast with new ideas for everyone who listens. And it is my hope, friends, when this podcast is over and you leave and you turn this thing off, you begin to think, how can I find new content in my life? How can I find new content in my experience? How can I find new content? Who can I interview? And what more research can I do? So my next speech will be unforgettable. That's my challenge to you.
See you next week.
Hey there, this is Darren LaCroix. Thanks for checking out this podcast episode on YouTube. If you want all of them, not every one is on YouTube, check out your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode. Keep being a sponge so you can be unforgettable.
Check out StagetimeUniversity.com, where good presenters become unforgettable.